Dmitri Shostakovich, 25th of September 1906 to the 9th of August 1975, was a Soviet-era Russian composer and pianist who became internationally known after the premiere of his first symphony in 1926 and thereafter was regarded as a major composer. Shostakovich achieved early fame in the Soviet Union but had a complex relationship with its government. His 1934 opera Lady Macbeth of Msensk was initially a success but later condemned by the Soviet government, putting his career at risk. In 1948, his work was denounced under the Zhdanov Doctrine, with professional consequences lasting several years. Even after his censure was rescinded in 1956, performances of his music were occasionally subject to state interventions, as with his 13th Symphony, 1962. Nevertheless, Shostakovich was a member of the Supreme Soviet of the RSFSR 1947 and the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union from 1962 until his death, as well as chairman of the RSFSR Union of Composers 1960 to 1968. Over the course of his career, he earned several important awards, including the Order of Lenin from the Soviet government. Shostakovich combined various musical techniques in his works. His music is characterized by sharp contrasts, elements of the grotesque and ambivalent tonality. He was also heavily influenced by neoclassicism and by the music of Gustav Mahler. His orchestral works include 15 symphonies and 6 concerti, 2 each for piano, violin and cello. His chamber works include 15 string quartets, a piano quintet and 2 piano trios. His solo piano works include 2 sonatas, an early set of 24 preludes and a later set of 24 preludes and fugues. Stage works include 3 completed operas and 3 ballets. Shostakovich also wrote several song cycles and a substantial quantity of music for theatre and film. Shostakovich's reputation has continued to grow after his death. Scholarly interest has increased significantly since the late 20th century, including considerable debate about the relationship between his music and his attitudes towards the Soviet government. Born into a Russian family that lived on Poldskaya Street in St. Petersburg, Russia, Shostakovich was the second of 3 children of Dmitri Boleslavovich Shostakovich and Sofia Vasilievna Kukulina. Shostakovich's immediate forebears came from Siberia, but his paternal grandfather, Boleslaw Shostakovich, was of Polish Catholic descent, tracing his family roots to the region of the town of Wielkaya in today's Belarus. A Polish revolutionary in the January uprising of 1863-64, Shostakovich was exiled to Naryn in 1866 in the crackdown that followed Dmitry Karakazov's assassination attempt on Tsar Alexander II. When his term of exile ended, Shostakovich decided to remain in Siberia. He eventually became a successful banker in Irkutsk and raised a large family. His son Dmitri Boleslavovich Shostakovich, the composer's father, was born in exile in Naryn in 1875 and studied physics and mathematics at St. Petersburg University, graduating in 1899. He then went to work as an engineer under Dmitri Mendeleev at the Bureau of Weights and Measures in St. Petersburg. In 1903, he married another Siberian immigrant to the capital, Sofia Vasilievna Kukulina, one of 6 children born to a Siberian Russian. Their son, Dmitri Dmitrovich Shostakovich, displayed musical talent after he began piano lessons with his mother at the age of 9. On several occasions, he displayed a remarkable ability to remember what his mother had played at the previous lesson and would get caught in the act of playing the previous lesson's music while pretending to read different music placed in front of him. In 1918, he wrote a funeral march in memory of two leaders of the cadet party murdered by Bolshevik sailors. In 1919, at age 13, Shostakovich was admitted to the Petrograd Conservatory, then headed by Alexander Glazunov, who monitored his progress closely and promoted him. Shostakovich studied piano with Leonid Nikolaev and Elena Rozanova, composition with Maximilian Steinberg, and counterpoint and fugue with Nikolai Sokolov, who became his friend. He also attended Alexander Ozovsky's music history classes. In 1925, he enrolled in the conducting classes of Nikolai Malko, where he conducted the Conservatory Orchestra in private performance of Beethoven's First Symphony. According to the recollections of the composer's classmate Valerian Bogdanov Berezovsky, Shostakovich stood at the podium, played with his hair and jacket cuffs, looked around at the hushed teenagers with instruments at the ready, and raised the baton. He neither stopped the orchestra nor made any remarks. He focused his entire attention on aspects of tempi and dynamics, which were very clearly displayed in his gestures. The contrast between the adagio molto of the introduction and the allegro con brio first theme were quite striking, as were those between the percussive accents of the chords, woodwinds, French horns, pizzicato strings, and the momentarily extended piano in the introduction following them. In the character given to the pattern of the first theme, I recall there was both vigorous striving and lightness. In the bass part, there was an emphasized pliancy of tenderly threaded articulation. Moments of these sorts were discoveries of an improvised order, born from an intuitively refined understanding of the character of a piece and the elements of musical imagery embedded in it, and the players enjoyed it. On the 20th of March 1925, Shostakovich's music was played in Moscow for the first time in a program that included works by his friend Vissarion Shebelin. To the composer's disappointment, the critics and public there received his music coolly. During his visit to Moscow, Mikhail Kavadry introduced him to Mikhail Tukhachevsky, who helped the composer find accommodation and work there, and sent a driver to take him to a concert in a very stylish automobile. Shostakovich's musical breakthrough was the First Symphony, written as his graduation piece at the age of 19. Initially, Shostakovich aspired to perform it only privately with the Conservatory Orchestra and prepared to conduct a scherzo himself. By late 1925, Malko had agreed to conduct its premiere with the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra after Steinberg and Shostakovich's friend Boleslav Yavorsky brought the symphony to his attention. On the 12th of May 1926, Malko led the premiere of the symphony. The audience received it enthusiastically, demanding an encore of the scherzo. Thereafter, Shostakovich regularly celebrated the date of his symphonic debut. After graduation, Shostakovich embarked on a dual career as concert pianist and composer, but his dry keyboard style was often criticized. Shostakovich maintained a heavy performance schedule until 1930. After 1933, he performed only his own compositions, along with Yuri Brushkov, Grigory Ginsburg, Lev Oborin, and Josef Schwartz. He was among the Soviet contestants in the inaugural International Chopin Piano Competition in Warsaw in 1927. Bogdanov Berezovsky later remembered, "The self-discipline with which the young Shostakovich prepared for the 1927 Chopin competition was astonishing. For 3 weeks he locked himself away at home, practicing for hours at a time, having postponed his composing and given up trips to the theatre and visits with friends. Even more startling was the result of this seclusion. Of course, prior to this time he had played superbly and occasioned Glazunov's now famous glowing reports. But during those days, his pianism, sharply idiosyncratic and rhythmically impulsive, multi-timbred yet graphically defined, emerged in its concentrated form." Natan Perelman, who heard Shostakovich play his Chopin programs before he went to Warsaw, said that his anti-sentimental playing, which eschewed rubato and extreme dynamic contrast, was unlike anything he had ever heard. Arnold Oshwang called Shostakovich's playing profound and lacking any salon-like mannerisms. Shostakovich was stricken with appendicitis on the opening day of the competition, but his condition improved by the time of his first performance on the 27th of January 1927. He had his appendix removed on the 25th of April. According to Shostakovich, his playing found favor with the audience. He persisted into the final round of the competition, but was ultimately earned only a diploma, no prize. Oberon was declared the winner. Shostakovich was upset about the result, but for a time resolved to continue a career as a performer. While recovering from his appendectomy in April 1927, Shostakovich said he was beginning to reassess those plans. "When I was well, I practiced the piano every day. I wanted to carry on like that until autumn and then decide. If I saw that I had not improved, I would quit the whole business. To be a pianist who is worse than Sviatoslav, Etkin, Ginsburg, and Brishkov, it is commonly thought that I am worse than them, is not worth it." After the competition, Shostakovich and Oberon spent a week in Berlin. There he met the conductor Bruno Walter, who was so impressed by Shostakovich's First Symphony that he conducted its first performance outside Russia later that year. Leopold Stokowski led the American premiere the next year in Philadelphia and also made the work's first recording.
Leopold! Leopold!
The first denunciation. On the 17th of January 1936, Joseph Stalin paid a rare visit to the opera for a performance of a new work, Quiet Flows the Don, based on the novel by Mikhail Sholokhov, by the little-known composer Ivan Dzerzhinsky, who was called to Stalin's box at the end of the performance and told that his work had considerable ideological political value. On 26th of January, Stalin revisited the opera, accompanied by Vyacheslav Molotov, Andrei Zadanov and Anastas Mikoyan, to hear Lady Macbeth of the Msensk district. He and his entourage left without speaking to anyone. Shostakovich had been forewarned by a friend that he should postpone a planned concert tour in Arkhangelsk to be present at that particular performance. Eyewitness accounts testify that Shostakovich was white as a sheet when he went to take his bow after the third act. The next day, Shostakovich left for Arkhangelsk, where he heard on 28th of January that Pravda had published an editorial titled Muddle instead of Music, complaining that the opera was a deliberate, dissonant, muddled stream of sounds that quacks, hoots, pants and gasps. Shostakovich continued his performance tour as scheduled with no disruptions. From Arkhangelsk, he instructed Isaac Glickman to subscribe to a clipping service. The editorial was the signal for a nationwide campaign during which even Soviet music critics who had praised the opera were forced to recant in print, saying they failed to detect the shortcomings of Lady Macbeth as pointed out by Pravda. There was resistance from those who admired Shostakovich, including Solotinsky, who turned up at a composers' meeting in Leningrad, called to denounce the opera and praised it instead. Two other speakers supported him. When Shostakovich returned to Leningrad, he had a telephone call from the commander of the Leningrad military district, who had been asked by Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky to make sure that he was all right. When the writer Isaac Babel was under arrest 4 years later, he told his interrogators that it was common ground for us to proclaim the genius of the slighted Shostakovich. On the 6th of February, Shostakovich was again attacked in Pravda, this time for his light comic ballet, The Limpid Stream, which was denounced because it jangles and expresses nothing and did not give an accurate picture of peasant life on a collective farm. Fearful that he was about to be arrested, Shostakovich secured an appointment with the chairman of the USSR State Committee on Culture, Platon Kurzatev, who reported to Stalin and Molotov that he had instructed the composer to reject formalist errors and in his art attain something that could be understood by the broad masses, and that Shostakovich had admitted being in the wrong, had asked for a meeting with Stalin, which was not granted. The Pravda campaign against Shostakovich caused his commissions and concert appearances and performance of his music to decline markedly. His monthly earnings dropped from an average of as much as 12,000 rubles to as little as 2,000. 1936 marked the beginning of the Great Terror, in which many of Shostakovich's friends and relatives were imprisoned or killed. These include Tukhachevsky, executed 12th of June 1937, his brother-in-law Vsevolod Frederiks, who was eventually released but died before he returned home, his close friend Nikolai Zilayakov, a musicologist who taught Tukhachevsky, was executed. His mother-in-law, the astronomer Sofia Mikhailovna Vaza, who was sent to a camp in Karaganda and later released. His friend, the Marxist writer Galina Serebryakova, who spent 20 years in the Gulag. His uncle Maxim Kostrakin died, and his colleagues Boris Kornilov executed and Adrian Piotrovsky executed. Shostakovich's daughter Galina was born during this period in 1936. His son Maxim was born 2 years later. Withdrawal of the Fourth Symphony. The publication of the Pravda editorials coincided with the composition of Shostakovich's Fourth Symphony. The work continued a shift in his style, influenced by the music of Mahler, and gave him problems as he attempted to reform his style. Despite the Pravda articles, he continued to compose the symphony and planned a premiere at the end of 1936. Rehearsals began that December, but according to Isaac Glickman, who had attended the rehearsals with the composer, the manager of the Leningrad Philharmonic persuaded Shostakovich to withdraw the symphony. Shostakovich did not repudiate the work and retained its designation as his Fourth Symphony. A reduction for two pianos was performed and published in 1946, and the work was finally premiered in 1961. In the months before the withdrawal of the Fourth Symphony and the completion of the Fifth on the 20th of July 1937, the only concert work Shostakovich composed was the Four Romances on texts by Pushkin.
What does my name mean for you? It soon will die as a voice of grief, a wave splash at a distant reef, a stir in wilderness untamed. In prayer for dead, despondent rolls, it will leave just the lethal trace that likes the epitaph in lace which nobody discerns at all. What does it hold? Forgotten, whole in new and rebel agitation, it will not give to your young soul the clear and gentle commemorations. But in the sad and silent day you will repeat this name with fervour. There is in the whole world, you say, the heart in which I live forever. So, what does my name mean for you?
Fifth Symphony and return to favour. The composer's response to his denunciation was the Fifth Symphony of 1937, which was musically more conservative than his recent works. Premiered on the 21st of November 1937 in Leningrad, it was a phenomenal success. The Fifth brought many to tears and welling emotions. Later, Shostakovich's purported memoir, Testimony, stated, "I'll never believe that a man who understood nothing could feel the Fifth Symphony." Of course they understood. They understood what was happening around them, and they understood what the Fifth was about. The success put Shostakovich in good standing once again. Music critics and the authorities alike, including those who had earlier accused him of formalism, claimed that he had learned from his mistakes and become a true Soviet artist. In a newspaper article published under Shostakovich's name, the fifth was characterized as a Soviet artist's creative response to just criticism. The composer Dmitri Kabalevsky, who had been among those who disassociated themselves from Shostakovich when the Pravda article was published, praised the fifth and congratulated Shostakovich for not having given in to the seductive temptations of his previous erroneous ways. It was also at this time that Shostakovich composed the first of his string quartets. In September 1937, he began to teach composition at the Leningrad Conservatory, which provided some financial security. The Second World War. After the outbreak of war between the Soviet Union and Germany in 1941, Shostakovich initially remained in Leningrad. He tried to enlist in the military but was turned away because of his poor eyesight. To compensate, he became a volunteer for the Leningrad Conservatory's firefighter brigade and delivered a radio broadcast to the Soviet people.
Час тому назад я закончил партитуру 2 частей большого симфонического сочинения. Если это сочинение мне удастся написать хорошо, удастся закончить 3-ю и 4-ю части, то тогда можно будет назвать это сочинение 7-й симфонией. Для чего я сообщаю об этом? Для того, чтобы радиослушатели, которые слушают меня сейчас, знали, что жизнь нашего города идет нормально. Все мы несем сейчас свою боевую вахту. Советские музыканты, мои дорогие и многочисленные соратники по оружию, мои друзья, помните, что сейчас нашему искусству грозит великая опасность. Будем же защищать нашу музыку, будем же честно и самоотверженно работать.
Shostakovich's most famous wartime contribution was his 7th Symphony. The composer wrote the first 3 movements in Leningrad while it was under siege. Shostakovich finished his 7th Symphony on the 27th of December 1941. The symphony was premiered by the Bolshoi Theatre Orchestra in Kubashayev on 29th of March 1942 and soon performed in London in June 1942 and the United States July 1942, where several conductors vied to conduct its first American performance. It was performed in Leningrad in August 1942 while the city was still under siege. The city's orchestra had only 14 musicians left, which led conductor Karl Eliasberg to reinforce it by recruiting anyone who could play an instrument. In 1948, Shostakovich, along with many other composers, was again denounced for formalism in the Zhdanov Decree. Andrei Zhdanov, chairman of the Supreme Soviet of the RSFSR, accused the composers, including Sergei Prokofiev and Aram Khachaturian, of writing inappropriate and formalist music. This was part of an ongoing anti-formalism campaign intended to root out all Western compositional influence as well as any perceived non-Russian output. The conference resulted in the publication of the Central Committee's decree on V. Moradeli's opera The Great Friendship, which targeted all Soviet composers and demanded that they write only proletarian music or music for the masses. The accused composers, including Shostakovich, were summoned to make public apologies in front of the committee. Most of Shostakovich's works were banned and his family had privileges withdrawn. Yuri Lyubimov says that at this time he waited for his arrest at night out on the landing by the lift so that at least his family wouldn't be disturbed. The decree's consequences for composers were harsh. Shostakovich was among those dismissed from the conservatory altogether. For him, the loss of money was perhaps the heaviest blow. Others still in the conservatory experienced an atmosphere thick with suspicion. No one wanted his work to be understood as formalist, so many resorted to accusing their colleagues of writing or performing anti-proletarian music. During the next few years, Shostakovich composed 3 categories of work: film music to pay the rent, official works aimed at securing official rehabilitation, and serious works for the desk drawer. The last included the Violin Concerto No. 1 and the song cycle from Jewish folk poetry. The cycle was written at a time when the post-war anti-Semitic campaign was already underway, with widespread arrests, including that of Dobrushin and Yeditsky, the compilers of the book from which Shostakovich took his texts. The restrictions on Shostakovich's music and living arrangements were eased in 1949 when Stalin decided that the Soviets needed to send artistic representatives to the Cultural and Scientific Congress for World Peace in New York City, and that Shostakovich should be among them. For Shostakovich, it was a humiliating experience, culminating in a New York press conference where he was expected to read a prepared speech. Nicholas Nabokov, who was present in the audience, witnessed Shostakovich starting to read in a nervous and shaky voice before he had to break off, and the speech was continued in English by a suave radio baritone. Fully aware that Shostakovich was not free to speak his mind, Nabokov publicly asked him whether he supported the then recent denunciation of Stravinsky's music in the Soviet Union. A great admirer of Stravinsky, who had been influenced by his music, Shostakovich had no alternative but to answer in the affirmative. Shostakovich never forgave Nabokov for his public humiliation. Stalin's death in 1953 was the biggest step towards Shostakovich's rehabilitation as a creative artist, which was marked by his 10th symphony. It features a number of musical quotations and codes, notably the DSCH motif, which is the notes D, E flat, C and B, which spell out Dmitri Shostakovich's D for Dmitri, SCH, the first 3 letters of his surname in German, while the savage second movement, according to testimony, is intended as a musical portrait of Stalin. The 10th ranks alongside the 5th and the 7th as one of Shostakovich's most popular works. 1953 also saw a stream of premieres of the desk drawer works. In 1960, the government wanted to appoint him chairman of the RSFSR Union of Composers, but to hold that position he was required to obtain party membership. It was understood that Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Communist Party from 1953 to 1964, was looking for support from the intelligentsia's leading ranks in an effort to create a better relationship with the Soviet Union's artists. On the one hand, the apparat was less repressive than it had been before Stalin's death. On the other, his son recalled that the event reduced Shostakovich to tears and that he later told his wife Irina that he had been blackmailed. Lev Lebedinsky has said that the composer was suicidal. In 1960, he was appointed chairman of the RSFSR Union of Composers from 1962 until his death. He also served as a delegate in the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. By joining the party, Shostakovich also committed himself to finally writing the homage to Lenin that he had promised before. His 12th symphony, which portrays the Bolshevik Revolution and was completed in 1961, was dedicated to Lenin and called The Year 1917. Shostakovich's musical response to these personal crises was the 8th String Quartet, composed in only 3 days. He subtitled the piece "To the Victims of Fascism and War," ostensibly in memory of the Dresden firebombing that took place in 1945. Yet, like the 10th Symphony, the quartet incorporates quotations from several of his past works and his musical monogram, D, E flat, C and B. Shostakovich confessed to his friend Isaac Glickman, "I started thinking that if someday I die, no one is likely to write a work in memory of me, so I'd better write one myself." Several of Shostakovich's colleagues, including Natalia Vosky-Mikoels and the cellist Valentin Berlinsky, were also aware of the 8 quartet's biographical intent. Peter J. Rabinovitz has also pointed covert references to Richard Strauss's Metamorphosen in it.
In 1962,
Shostakovich again turned to the subject of anti-Semitism in his 13th Symphony, subtitled Babi Yar. The symphony sets a number of poems by Yevgeny Yevtushenko, the first of which commemorates a massacre of Ukrainian Jews during the Second World War.
Babi Yar. There is no memorial above Babi Yar. The steep ravine is like a coarse tombstone. I'm frightened. I feel as old today as the Jewish race itself. I feel now that I am a Jew. Here I wander through ancient Egypt, and here I hang on the cross and die, and I still bear the mark of the nails. I feel that I am Dreyfus. The bourgeois rabble denounce and judge me. I am behind bars. I am encircled, persecuted, spat on, slandered, and fine ladies with lace frills squeal and poke their parasols into my face. I feel that I am a little boy in Bialystok. Blood is spattered over the floor. The ringleaders in the tavern are getting brutal. They smell of vodka and onions. I'm kicked to the ground. I'm powerless. In vain I beg the persecutors. They guffaw. Kill the Yids. Save Russia. A grain merchant beats up my mother. Oh, my Russian people, I know that at heart you are internationalists, but there have been those with soiled hands who abused your good name. I know that my land is good. How filthy that without the slightest shame the anti-Semites proclaimed themselves the union of the Russian people. I feel that I am Anne Frank, as tender as a shoot in April. I am in love and I have no need of words, but we need to look at each other. How little we can see or smell. The leaves in the sky are shut off from us, but there is a lot we can do. We can tenderly embrace each other in the darkened room. Someone's coming. Don't be frightened. These are the sounds of spring. Spring is coming. Come to me. Give me your lips quickly. They are breaking down the door. No. It's the ice breaking. Above Babi Yar, the wild grass rustles. The trees look threatening, as though in judgment. Here everything silently screams, and bearing my head, I feel as though I am slowly turning grey, and I become a long, soundless scream. Above the thousands and thousands buried here, I am each old man who was shot here. I am each child who was shot here. No part of me can ever forget this. Let the Internationale thunder out when the last at anti-Semite on the earth has finally been buried. There is no Jewish blood in my blood, but I feel the loathsome hatred of all anti-Semites as though I were a Jew, and that is why I am a true Russian. Shostakovich died on the 9th of August 1975. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in 1973, and his death is variously attributed to lung cancer or heart failure.
Shostakovich's music shows the influence of many of the composers he most admired. Bach in his fugues and passacaglias, Beethoven in the late quartets, Mahler in the symphonies, and Berg in his use of musical codes and quotations. Among Russian composers, he particularly admired Modest Mussorgsky, whose operas Boris Godunov and Kovachina he reorchestrated. Mussorgsky's influence is most prominent in the wintry scenes of Lady Macbeth and the 11th symphonies, as well as in satirical works such as Rayok. Prokofiev's influence is most apparent in the earlier piano works such as the First Sonata and First Concerto. The influence of Russian church and folk music is evident in his works for unaccompanied choir of the 1950s. Many commentators have noted the disjunction between the experimental works before the 1936 denunciation and the more conservative ones that followed. The composer told Flora Litvinova, "Without party guidance, I would have displayed more brilliance, used more sarcasm, I could have revealed my ideas openly instead of having to resort to camouflage." After 1936, Shostakovich's music became more conservative. During this time, he also composed more chamber music. While his chamber works were largely tonal, they included tone rows, although he treated these thematically rather than serially. Vocal works are also a prominent feature of his late output. Jewish themes. In the 1940s, Shostakovich began to show an interest in Jewish themes. He was intrigued by Jewish music's ability to build a jolly melody on sad intonations. Examples of works that include Jewish themes are the Fourth String Quartet, 1949, the First Violin Concerto, 1948, and the Four Monologues on Pushkin Poems, 1952, as well as the Piano Trio in E minor, 1944. He was further inspired to write with Jewish themes when he examined Moisei Berezovsky's 1944 thesis on Jewish folk music. In 1948, Shostakovich acquired a book of Jewish folk songs, from which he composed the song cycle from Jewish folk poetry. He initially wrote 8 songs meant to represent the hardships of being Jewish in the Soviet Union. To disguise this, he added 3 more meant to demonstrate the great life Jews had under the Soviet regime. Despite his efforts to hide the real meaning in the work, the Union of Composers refused to approve his music in 1949 under the pressure of the anti-Semitism that gripped the country. So his song cycle, from Jewish folk poetry could not be performed until after Stalin's death in March 1953, along with all the other works that were forbidden. Throughout his compositions, Shostakovich demonstrated a controlled use of musical quotation. This stylistic choice had been common among earlier composers, but Shostakovich developed it into a defining characteristic of his music. Rather than quoting other composers, Shostakovich preferred to quote himself. Musicologists such as Sophia Moshevich, Ian MacDonald and Stephen Harris have connected his works through their quotations. One example is the main theme of Katerina's aria Seroyezya Korishimoy from the fourth act of Lady Macbeth. The aria's beauty comes as a breath of fresh air in the intense, overbearing tone of the scene in which Katerina visits her lover Sergei in prison. The theme is made tragic when Sergei betrays her and finds a new lover upon blaming Katerina for his incarceration. More than 25 years later, Shostakovich quoted this theme in his 8th string quartet. In the midst of this quartet's oppressive and somber themes, the cello introduces the Serioza theme in the bright key of F sharp major, about 3 minutes into the 4th movement. This theme emerges once again in his 14th string quartet. As in the 8th quartet, the cello introduces the theme, which here serves as a dedication to the cellist of the Beethoven string quartet, Sergei Sharinsky. William Walton, his British contemporary, described Shostakovich as the greatest composer of the 20th century. Musicologist David Fanning concludes in Grove's dictionary that amid the conflicting pressures of official requirements, the mass suffering of his fellow countrymen and his personal ideals of humanitarian and public service, he succeeded in forging a musical language of colossal emotional power.